The rebellion in northern Syria, and more precisely in the city of Aleppo, is suffering debilitating setbacks. The siege of Aleppo, which started over the summer, is coming to its end with a massive regime advance on what was the key rebel enclave in a city in Syria so far. The risk is the following, that the rebellion is going to turn into an insurgency, a rural insurgency that will radicalize more quickly, that will depend more on the more extreme elements of the rebellion, including the jihadi group Jabhat al-Nusra, and will therefore be politically and operationally more difficult to support. The Assad regime has benefited from the Russian intervention, from massive Iranian support, and from the deployment of Shia militias from Iraq, Lebanon, other places. It is winning militarily on the ground. The problem is the key question is whether the Assad regime can translate those military gains into something political in terms of governing those areas, in terms of obtaining international assistance, including international funding for its own campaign. So a lot of the international community is facing massive moral and political dilemmas. To what extent should they subsidize a victorious Assad regime in its own counterinsurgency and stabilization campaign? And more importantly, this crisis may lead to a new era of jihadism. The number of rebel fighters and others who will feel either abandoned or played by Western, Arab, and other actors will possibly just adopt more radical forms of fighting. So the weakening of ISIS is not the end of the story, and the Assad regime's victory in Aleppo is not the end of this story. The crisis in Yemen is often overlooked, but it has massive human, security, and strategic costs. The Gulf intervention in Yemen, which is led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE and started in March 2015, has failed to translate into strong political and diplomatic leverage for Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, who are looking for ways to extricate themselves from this conflict without necessarily losing face, while consolidating their gains in southern Yemen. The Yemen war is fundamentally a civil war. Yemen is deeply divided between the Houthi insurgency and its allies, and on the other side, an array of Islamist, secessionist, southern, and tribal elements who all have a stake in the continuation of the fight. It's difficult to see at the moment how all these parties can come to an agreement. I think it's difficult to envision a political solution that brings all these parties together. The responsibility really lies on Saudi Arabia, which is the prime military and political actor, to really create a consensus among these factions and create the basis for a settlement with the Houthis and their allies in Sana'a. Yemen is overlooked also because, in part, it seems peripheral to the crisis in the region. It's geographically isolated compared to Syria or Iraq, and it's a country that is not really at the heart of the current history of the Middle East. This is a major mistake. Yemen is a very large country that has a massive impact on the security of the Arabian Peninsula. And a failed Yemen at the door of Saudi Arabia is a recipe for long-term disaster. Really, the decision for de-escalating lies in Riyadh primarily. But one also needs to keep in mind that the Houthi insurgency has also caused a lot of damage to the fabric of Yemen.